Okay, are we live? Yes, we're live. Hey, how's it going? Good to see you, camera. Um, it's me, Comic Crack. I felt like chatting. There's been a lot of people doing. It seems like I'm seeing more people talking about movies and things. I just watched Shannon Solid 4 ST Bend talking about a couple of movies he picked up, including the Criterion version of Seconds, and I think Phantasm and documentary Wrecking Crew. Count Von Strange has been posting a couple of videos. I'm sorry, excuse me, talking about movies, mostly Arrow video releases. He did a great look at Basket Case, which is one of my all-time favorite kind of low budget horror movies. I love that movie. I don't know how many times I watched it when I was growing up. That one and Reanimator had a pretty big effect on me. Um, there was just something about those, but I think Basket Case specifically was just so great. Such a low budget, fantastic flick. I have yet to pick up the Arrow version for myself. It's like a little, I think one version came with like a basket case pin, an enamel pin, and I know there's a booklet, and I know there's a bunch of documentary footage with it, so that's great. And I just saw him, Come On Strange, do a video where he's talking about Slugs, a movie that I haven't seen, but again, another Arrow video release. So that makes me want to check it out. Sorry, moving the mic here. Make sure we're good on placement and stuff. And then, of course, Custom Bromstar. Always, I think once a week, he talks about movies, and his kind of tastes and the things that he ends up getting are very similar to mine, especially with his Criterion love. Sorry, I'll stop fidgeting with the camera. Especially with his Criterion collection love. So that's always good to watch those. I picked up a few things, and I've been working through a boxed set that I wanted to talk about. But before I do that, I just tonight finished reading the Timothy Truman article or interview, rather, from the Comics Journal that I picked up recently. It's really, really great. They do mention, I think it's Gary Groth who's talking to him, who's doing the interviewing. They mention there's so much great information in here. It's a really, yes, Gary Groth. It's a really good look at his. That was something dinging. That must have been me. Oh, hey, for some reason Siri was on and recording what I was saying. That's very strange. Sorry, one sec. Just let me make sure. These devices, man, they're coming alive. Yeah, no, nothing there now. That's very weird. Anyway, just a really good overview of his time in comics, starting with work that he did for TSR, which later became kind of absorbed by SPI. A lot of the games that I have, especially some of the Ares magazine games, there's a few of them that have Tim Truman art. And I didn't realize that was kind of at the beginning of his career. So he talks about the issues that he had with them. Obviously, not obviously, some of these things he doesn't go into great detail about. Partially, one of the stories partially due to the fact that I think at the time of this, there was still a court case in the works with people who were taking, I believe, I don't remember now. Now I can't remember. I can't remember if it was something to do with people taking DC to court over various things. But it just seems like he's that kind of guy. He didn't really want to talk about some of this stuff in great detail. He kind of gives you the broad strokes that he had issues with TSR SPI. I didn't realize, and maybe Russ, forgive me, Russ, if you have said this before. I didn't realize that First Comics, there was an issue with First Comics as far as them not paying their creators properly. All that type of stuff is really fascinating to me. Especially, they mention in here a copy of Comics Journal where they write up, the whole issue is focused around the kind of contract. I don't know if you can really call it a contract, But when the artists and writers started to kind of organize and create like their own union and stuff, they had kind of a write-up of what their quote-unquote demands were to work. So there's an issue of Comics Journal that I don't have. I do see that my comic shop has it, so I'm going to order it because I would like to read that. That stuff is really interesting to me, especially what the write-ups were at the time, because this is really as things were unfolding, these interviews and articles were coming out about it. So that's fascinating. So when he had issues with SPI, TSR, he did Grimjack. He had some issues with Grimjack. He had a falling out with First. When he finally went to Eclipse, one of the things I thought was very cool, which kind of makes me love Eclipse Comics even more, when he started a working relationship with them, they basically gave him a check and said, take this to TSR and buy all your characters. The creators, hey, 64-page special, how the hell are you? Yes, that's exactly it. Thank you very much. It's the creators' Bill of Rights. That's exactly what it was. So Comics Journal had an issue where they just focused on the creators' Bill of Rights, and I think they reprinted the whole thing. And I think in this article, Gary Groth and Tim Truman, they both agree that the version that they'd read, I don't know if it's the version that got printed in the journal, but they had issues with some of the things. So I'm sure that Gary offered some insight into his thoughts on the Creators' Bill of Rights when that issue came out. So that'll be interesting to read as well. So Eclipse gave Truman a bunch of money and said, take this to TSR or SPI and buy all your characters. We want you to have the rights. And I didn't realize that how much on the forefront a company like Eclipse was when it came to creators' rights and kind of owning and having complete control and ownership over their characters. I knew that that was part of it, but I didn't realize that maybe they were more on the forefront than I originally thought. And like I said, it makes me really love Eclipse even more than I already do. So it was a fantastic interview. And then he starts talking about how his work has transitioned to kind of create something more historically relevant and digging into the history of some of these characters. He talks a bit about his company, Four Winds Publishing. And at the time that this was written, or the time this interview took place, which I believe was 1991. Is that what it said in here? Let's just double check before I go any further. Yeah, September 1991. At the time that this interview took place, he was in the works of publishing some more, I believe just a book, co-publishing it with Eclipse to kind of tap into their resources as far as getting things bound and distribution network and stuff like that. Really great. They talk about Jack Jackson in here a bit, and then I've started reading Jack Jackson talking about the Western comics, which is also really fascinating. And again, especially from a voice like that, who I really appreciate and admire. And to see the kind of similarities between the two of them as far as their interest in indigenous cultures and wanting to do some justice to things. And in Jackson's piece that he writes about Westerns, he just talks a little bit more about the gritty nature. He does talk about American Westerns and their representation of that specific time period. And then, of course, it transitions. He talks a lot about comics that were coming out at the time, too, but then dives right into the spaghetti Western and just talks about the comic lineage of how Westerns were written. I mean, he talks a bit about Jonah Hex, the first couple of arcs of Jonah Hex and how good they were, and it kind of goes into a bit of detail. I haven't read any of that stuff, but hearing him talk or reading him talking about it does make me want to check out the first arcs of Jonah Hex just to see what that's like. He says, when you compare it to the European Westerns, it's pretty mundane, but considering what was going on in North America, it's really top notch. So that's very cool. So that's a great article. So, I mean, yeah, the journal, it's a hell of a read, especially when you find some write-ups or interviews with creators that you respect. They do a damn good job. They also talk about Truman's gun fetish, as Groth puts it. And Truman is kind of taken aback. He's like, I actually don't have a gun fetish. I actually have a lot of trauma around guns, which Groth kind of laughs at. He's like, you could never tell from your comics. You even had a scout handbook where you go, or a scout weapons handbook, which to me was always more of, when I did this last video, that was the one shot that I had forgotten about. That's more in line with his TSR SPI work. And he says so in here as well, too, that there's a lot of people out there that are creating these RPGs in the Scout universe. So I really did that single issue to kind of give them more history of the world and the weapons in it so they could make their games richer. But he said, honestly, I really don't like guns. And he kind of relays a couple of stories about hunting with his dad that really traumatized him. So really fantastic interview, really fantastic. I like Tim Truman a hell of a lot. He seems like a really, really good dude. And one thing I didn't realize is that Eclipse put out a record of Tim Truman and his band, which now I have bookmarked on eBay. I'm hoping that I make some more sales on eBay so I can translate that money into buying that record, because I'd love to hear it. Yeah, so really, really, really great issue so far. And the Creators Bill of Rights issue is going to be next on my list of journals to pick up. Thank you very much for that 64-page special. I appreciate you jumping in and relaying that. So movies, the kind of main reason, although that was really great too. I've been working my way through the Seijin Suzuki, the early years, volume 1. The movies, the kind of timeline that we're looking at here, 1958, 1961, 1962, 1963, and 1965. So I've watched a couple of these already, and they're just as good as I thought they would be. They're not as crazy as some of his later work, but you can definitely see some of the Suzuki editing style come to life in these movies. I watched Teenage Yakuza, which was just, it was really just phenomenal. So I mean, he really worked in kind of a teenage rebellion type of genre. As I've said before, his movies, when he worked for Nikatsu, the deal with a lot of the directors at the time, especially with those bigger companies, is that you were a studio director. So they gave you a script, you filmed that script, your movie got put out in the theaters, end of story. Obviously, there's different different levels in that. Some directors, yes, they were given scripts and they were allowed more insight and more ability to alter the story. There was also some directors who were kind of at the top of their game, who could then do their own projects. But a guy like Suzuki, he was doing the opening movie, so like the B, C, D, E, F, G graded movie, where they had very, very, very limited time and money, and your sole purpose was to be the first movie in a double bill, so nobody had any expectations. Just film this product, and we're going to put it in the theater. Which is where a lot of his issues came, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I've spoken about it before. But that said, he did dabble in altering his movies and editing scripts and things. But there's a lot of themes of rebellion throughout his movies, whether it's a gangster who doesn't kind of fit the mold of a gangster. In Teenage Yakuza specifically, one of the main characters. Let's see if they put a name on the back. Yeah, so Jiro is his name. He, not on purpose, the kind of his little community, Yakuza are moving into the community and starting to rough up or try to intimidate some of the local shop owners and restaurant owners, and talk about a movie depicting Yakuza as just actual not tough whatsoever. Kind of just not quite knuckleheads either. Just kind of, I don't even know the right way to put it. They're not your stereotypical tough guy Yakuza, that's for sure. Jiro makes short work of them and beats the hell out of them on a regular basis. So the town decides, the people in this town decide that he's going to be their protector, and they start giving him money. Eventually, the Yakuza threatens the shop owners and tells them that they have to report Jiro to the police. So now the whole angle is that he's accepting pay to be kind of their protector. So they're kind of painting him as a gangster. He goes to jail. He doesn't want anything to do with any of the life. His friends want to start their own little gang so they can fight the Yakuza, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with that either. He just wants to be a teenager. He just wants to go about his business and have fun and have a good time. And that seems to be one of the themes that does kind of go through some of his movies, that idea of just being in these moments, or maybe that's my reading of it anyway, just being in these moments and not wanting to become an adult, even when you're forced with the decision of like, listen, you do have this ability. You could actually help these people. He just doesn't want to help the people. He wants to get back his friend, who then joins the gang, and he eventually does win back his friend by the end of the movie. Really entertaining. And then I watched The Wind of Youth Group Crosses the Mountain Pass, which again is a story of a teenager who drops out of school basically to kind of bum around and hitchhike, and meets a traveling kind of circus magicians, but they have a stripper as well, which is the draw to the shows. Nobody wants to come and see their half-assed magic tricks. They come for the stripper. The stripper eventually leaves, and it's just this kind of they're just trying to figure out what to do now, So very, very entertaining flicks. Really, really dig Suzuki, and these don't disappoint. It's just so great that we can have this ability to rediscover some of these directors that would have been lost to time. And again, I think it mostly goes thanks to places like Criterion, for sure, because that's where I first saw Suzuki stuff, on Criterion. But the fact that there's all these companies out there that are willing to do, like, who the hell is going to do a box set of this guy? I mean, it's obviously the path that's been led by a lot of people to get to this point. I'd love to get the second volume as well too, and I think it has 5 movies as well. Yeah, but I can't remember what the second box set focuses on. This one is the youth movies, so there's going to be that stuff throughout. Really, really, really great so far. And then recently I picked up a few movies from a secondhand store. Just before we went to see Queens of the Stone Age, a couple days before that, I was down in another part of town visiting, and I stopped in at a used record store just to kind of look for a couple of things. I was looking for some Electric Wizard, actually, this band Electric Wizard CDs. And in their display case, they had these movies. Redemption, the company Redemption, they put out, I think they're affiliated. I don't know if they're like a cousin of Kino Lorber. I do see Kino Lorber on the back here, or if it was just a co-production. I don't know if they're part of Kino Lorber. But Redemption puts out a lot of 60s and 70s European kind of erotic movies or whatever. And you don't find them often. It's not something that pops up in used shops. People get the Redemption videos and then they keep them, or they sell them online. And these were pretty cheap considering. So I picked up the 4 that they had. I kind of flipped through them, and I figured I'm not going to see these again. I should just grab all of these. 2 of them are from Jess Franco. and both star his then wife, Lena Romay. Jess Franco, most notably kind of known for Vampiros Lesbos, which is a kind of classic. No booklets in these ones. Um, but for me, Jess Franco is he was rather, he was an unbelievable director. And again, he's a guy that I've talked about before, so I don't want to bore you with too much history, but suffice it to say that his ability to make these movies and how he made these movies and the amount of movies that he made in his career, even kind of at the same time, he was kind of notorious for shooting 3 movies at the same time. So he'd get a cast in and he'd bring them their dialogue for the day at the top of the day. And some of the documentary footage that I've seen with some of the actors that were in his movies, they'd say things like, "What the hell is this dialogue? This sounds nothing like my character that I was doing yesterday." And he would just say, "Don't worry about it. Just read the dialogue. It'll be fine." Because what he was really doing was filming scenes for another movie. So I think he had a really good relationship with producers because he was able to pump out these, again, kind of B, C, D, and E grade movies for dirt cheap, and they'd always have a really good return. So he was a real smooth talker. He was a jazz musician. He acted in his movies. The cast in his movies was very multinational, or from all parts of the world. At any given time on a movie, there may be 5 or 6 different languages being spoken. And Jess was multilingual himself. He knew a number of languages and could communicate quite easily with all of these actors and actresses from all parts of the world. A hell of a guy. It is interesting when he puts himself in the movies, sometimes the role that he plays. Now, I think it's in this one. So the first one I got was female vampire. That also seems to be a theme with these European erotic movies of the time. Lots of vampires, especially female vampires, for obvious reasons. Oh, sorry, a little bit of chaos here, knocking over microphones. That out of the way. So there's the look at the back there. Sorry about the glare. This one does have quite a lot of bonus features on it. Mastered in HD, French with optional English subtitles. There's an extended version, which is 100 minutes. Then there's the standard version, which was only 70 minutes. Destiny and Soft Focus, Jess Franco Remembers Female Vampires, a new documentary. And then Words for Lena, a tribute by co-star Jean-Pierre Boyot, produced by Daniel Goyette, and original theatrical trailers. This one's from 1973. I believe he wrote all of his movies. I don't know how many he did in his life, but it was well over 100 movies that he did while he was alive. And I mean, again, it's this ability to create a world that's really unlike anything else. Again, just because you're on my mind, because you were in the chat, 64-page special was talking in a video about his kind of discovery of various channels and just watching people's channels and really getting in almost insight into their personalities through how they collect. And that's for sure something that's huge for me, is these unique voices that are creating their own worlds, no matter where they are in the kind of hierarchy of popularity or unpopularity. Somebody with the ability and just a vision that is unflinching, and they're just willing to go forward and do and create something that they want to create, and screw anybody who thinks otherwise, even if it is stuff that's maybe a little more taboo subject wise. I really admire. The uniquer the better. Yes, indeed. And it's just good to have these other voices. I mean, if you just have the one set of voices, like imagine if we just had superhero comics, it'd be fucking boring as shit, man. It'd be really dull. Imagine if we just, as much as I love superhero movies, imagine if we just had superhero movies or blockbuster movies. It'd be fucking irritating. So and then the other side of it is, especially in the 60s and the 70s, and especially with stuff that was more adult themed. Uh, they were a lot of these directors and creators and writers and actors and et cetera, they were given such free reign to do whatever you want to do. I mean, that was the classic story. I think I've told it before about Jess Franco, that in some of his movies, the mandate was, all I have to do is I have to show a naked woman. Every 10 minutes, I have to show boobs. Other than that, they didn't care what I was doing. They didn't care what the story was. They didn't want to have any input whatsoever. As long as at the 10-minute mark, I showed a naked woman. That's it. So that freedom allows you to do so much, right? Um, so in this one, I think this is the one, because I have seen Exorcism before. Uh, and I think this is the one where Jess is the father, plays the father to Lena Romay's character. And again, they had a romantic relationship in real life. So the fact that he would set himself up as, I believe it was a sexually abusive father as well in the movie, who she kills, is really interesting. And here he is here. Um, I may be wrong about that too, because seeing this still, it makes me, because again, he did put himself in a number of his movies, and he did actually do music for a bunch of the movies as well to himself. Um, but anyway, so this is Exorcism. This one doesn't have much for special features, but it does have two versions: the extended 97-minute version, and then the standard horror version, which was 69 minutes, and then just a trailer. This one is from 1975. And I've talked about this next gentleman before when I bought the magazine about him. I don't own much from Jean Rollin, and I haven't seen a lot of his movies, but the couple that I have seen, very interested in. So there was two more of his as well from Redemption. I just watched on YouTube not too long ago, maybe a week ago or so, a little kind of interviews with Rollin, talking about his movies and talking about why he put some stuff in his movies that he did. A lot of his movies have these two, they're a couple of different actresses, but they're twins. And that's kind of a recurring theme throughout his movies. These two leading females, again, mostly vampires. He really kind of dug into the whole vampire imagery with his movies. That was a big fascination for him. And again, young nubile females, twins, who would kind of almost drift through his stuff is really kind of dreamlike. There's a lot of imagery that is very almost surreal, and he does say in some interviews that surrealism was a big part of what he was going for. He didn't want things necessarily to be linear. He wanted images to stand on their own. He had a great appreciation for kind of Renaissance painters and things. So his idea was to create these movies that would offer you a scene that could be seen almost like a painting, you know. So he wasn't as, hey, Damien, how the heck are you? He wasn't as concerned with a story, especially a linear story of any kind. So this will be good. So the other thing about Jean Rollin is he did have Drouillet did a lot of the poster art, which I showed when we were flipping through that magazine. So they have a little reproduction of it on the back here. This one comes with a great little booklet. Actually, I think both of them do. Yes, they do. Both of these come with a little booklet. I don't know if the Jess Franco ones did. That's a lot of haze. It's like a Butthole Surfers song in here. So this will be interesting to have a read through. Tim Lucas, I think. Yes, 20-page booklet with an essay by Tim Lucas, editor of Video Watchdog. With a lot of these movies, Tim Lucas was always had his hand in a lot of this kind of stuff, whether it was doing little write-ups or doing a little documentary. I think he was also involved with a couple of companies releasing movies as well. And there's Rollin there. Born in 1938, died in 2010. So I'm looking forward to these ones. So this first one is The Nude Vampire, and it is from 1970. French with optional English subtitles, the English dubbed version, an introduction by Rollin that's 2 minutes long, an interview with Jean Rollin, 19 minutes, interview with Natalie Perry, 4 minutes, 20-page booklet, French and English trailers, and then trailers for 4 other films of his. So there's the twins there at the top. So I'm looking forward to this one. I might have seen, I know I saw some Rollin movies with a friend of mine when I lived in Ontario. I don't remember if this was one of them though. So either way, it'll be good to kind of get into these again. And then finally, from 1973, Requiem for a Vampire from Jean Rollin as well. And the same introduction by Rollin himself, documentary featuring some of the actresses, interviews with actresses, and another booklet. And again, different actresses, twins again though. And lots of stuff that takes place at beaches as well, from what I remember of the films that I've seen of his. A lot of imagery of the tide washing in, linked to kind of female sexuality and that sort of thing. Very arty, for sure. There's no doubt about it. And some of these erotic titles, like I said, because they were given so much freedom, they really could get arty with things. They didn't really have to follow any. Yeah, back when vampires were cool and surreal. Absolutely. And that's exactly how, that's a very, very well said, because that's exactly what, that's exactly how he handles it, for sure. It's like the zombie movies of the time too. There's something about the zombie movies from back then, as opposed to now. It's just a different take on these characters. Let's see, what else do we got? I'll just flip through the rest of the book there, since we're almost there anyway. Yeah, so like I said, these ones I haven't watched yet, but they're next on the list. And so, The Bizarre Melodrama of Jean Rollin by Tim Lucas. So I know that I sent it to Gorvidal, but I'll try to remember to put some links, and there's a picture of the back there. I'll try to remember to put some links. There was a great series called EUROTIKA where they talk about a lot of these directors, and there was an episode on both Jess Franco and Jean Rollin. I'll try to remember to put the links to those in this video when it gets published. They're worth checking out if you want to kind of get a sense of who they were and what they were going for. So that's it. Those are the movies I wanted to discuss. I haven't read anything else. That comics journal really just took up my time. Plus I had a convention that I was at all weekend as well too, a work convention. Nothing nothing comic related whatsoever, unfortunately. A little dry, but that's okay. Yeah, that's it. Just looking to see if there was anything else. No, nothing else. Thank you very much for joining me. Damien, it was good to see you. 64-page special. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys hanging out. And I hope to see you all soon. We'll talk to you later. So long.